This meeting is organized by the Norwegian Center for Humanitarian Studies and PRIO, Peace Research Institute Oslo, as part of a seminar series that we have together with the Norwegian Red Cross. It relates to a research project called Do No Harm, Ethical Humanitarian Innovation and Digital Bodies, with key project members present in this meeting. In addition, we have some participants from Norwegian humanitarian organizations. My name is Christoph Lidén, and I'm a senior researcher at PRIO. In the Norwegian Center for Humanitarian Studies, we have started a seminar series called Scenario Webinars, where we address different topics of humanitarian action by thinking about the future. So we recently had one such seminar on the future of urban warfare and implications for the protection of civilians. In this meeting, we will look into the very methods of scenarios and foresights. And for this, we are so lucky to have with us Brita Fladvad Nielsen, who's an associate professor at the Institute for Design at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU. And she's part of the network and an institutional contact point in our center. So Brita will introduce this topic for about 20 minutes, and then we will do a sort of sample exercise as a way into a conversation on the future of digital technology in humanitarian action. So Brita, I hereby give you the floor, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. So I will try to talk about scenario building. I went through what do I do that is related to scenario building, and basically I'm from the Department of Design, and we work with scenario methods of the very many different formats. And a little bit about who I am. I have a master in industrial design and a PhD in design methods. My PhD is more specifically on design for humanitarian markets. And since my PhD, I have been focusing on complex problem solving and co-design in multi-stakeholder environments. And I use approaches such as design thinking, forecasting, open innovation, also new participatory methods, which means participation with use of new technologies, and design and policy making. And the contexts I've been working with have been the humanitarian market, but also smart cities and service design approaches. So after I did my research on humanitarian markets, I wanted to look for the next most complex problem I could think of researching. So I went to smart cities. And for me, if you study smart cities all over the world, what you will see is the best and the worst of technology and how you can use it. So this picture is from Bhopal in India, where I visited 4 different smart city systems. And here, for example, they have set up camera systems in 4 different traffic crossings, and this have given 40,000 traffic tickets in less than 3 months. And what is more interesting about this is that after they have given these tickets, the smart city owns the ID of all the people that they have caught on camera making a traffic violation. And after that, they can follow that person through the whole city and see where they travel. So they're gathering so much data about these people. And they can also see, for example, the movement of waste management and ambulances. And if somebody is a little bit late to work or a little bit late to pick up a patient, they can also give a fine to that person, which is sent on the mobile phone. And they then also track people from that. They also have, for example, systems for monitoring street vendors. Street vendors in India, they have a little bit less of a citizenship status because they don't own a home, but still they have to be mapped into a smart city system and where they're given 1 square meter to sell their stuff on. And as a customer, you can walk past the street vendor and you can look up that person on an app, and you can see if they have any crime record or if they've sold any bad produce. So you're mapping so many things about the citizens and the non-citizens. And also they have idea of biometric ID of 1 billion people of their population, and that will tell who gets, for example, access to cheaper cooking oil and those kind of social support systems. And in India, in the Smart City mission, they claim that this will actually create less corruption because it will be more transparent. But of course, we can discuss the aspects of that later. But it says a little bit about how smart cities is really the testing grounds for new technologies and how you can see different countries using it in different ways. So we also have smart city experiments in Norway. Bodø is, for example, a place where an American investor came and gave them 200 million kroner to build a whole infrastructure of their smart city. And then, of course, you have the danger of vendor lock-in and all those big traps that you have with those kind of agreements. So back to scenario building, because this is a way of like seeing what will a city be, what can a city be, city become, and if you have enough investments, you can basically create the future. So where does this kind of scenario build from? The origin in enterprises came from 1967 with the RAND Corporation in the US. They called it Future Now Thinking. And it was mainly used for the future of warfare because they saw that military spending increased to support the Vietnam War, and the interest began to grow in finding ways to look into the future and plan changes. And basically then scenario planning was expected to forecast the future exactly, and that you could use scenario building to plan according to a true scenario. And you had very few actors in the 60s and 70s. You had Hudson Institute focusing on corporate planning, RAND Corporation on warfare. You had SRI on predicting, for example, the US educational system. MIT used it more to stir up public debate around the nature of growth. And then by the late 70s, a majority of the larger US corporations had adopted scenario planning. But then when you moved closer to the 80s, they of course saw that these scenarios didn't necessarily come true, and you could make very poor investments. This is an example of how they predicted that the home computer would look like, right? So it shows that scenario planning is not the true future. And people started losing money because they had invested based on only on single scenarios. So we have sort of moved from the idea that scenario planning is actually seeing the future to use scenario planning more as a foresight discussion, to something that we can discuss around, something that we can learn around, and to actually understand the mindsets of the people that use the scenarios. And we also use scenario building to create stories of equally plausible futures. And in design, we think more about the scenario as a story because we see that the scenario starts to take shape very quickly when you have a story to tell. So we sort of see that creating a common scenario and pulling key stakeholders into our scenario planning, that can actually create the learning and actually push towards that future we want to happen. So we have the two most popular scenario building techniques that you probably know. It's forecasting and backcasting. So forecasting is the process of making predictions based on the past and present data, and most commonly by analysis of trends. And then you have backcasting, that is about envisioning a future and starting with that, and then working backwards to describe possible ways to make that future happen. So typically you're trying to make a vision together with your key stakeholders of what you want. Then afterwards you move backwards to create the steps. So this is, for example, a method that was used for Kyoto Protocol and very many big climate change processes have been based on backcasting, because you can make multiple stakeholders actually commit certain steps towards a goal, right? Like the reduction of temperature. So I've used backcasting a lot. For example, when planning what kind of energy solutions you can have in refugee camps together with different stakeholders. And a lot of something that's very important for designers and others that work with scenario building is that you need to think with representations. It means you need models or drawings or some way of envisioning your scenario. And that is because thinking with representations allows us to think the previously unthinkable, right? So basically shaping something with your hands or trying to put it out there and visualize it gives a new dimension to your thinking. So we use in design, we use visualization, drawing, sketching, modeling, both as a way to make sense of our own strategic design process. Like here on this picture, you see Carrie from Homeland, right? She has, when she gets all this information and she can't make sense of it, she puts it out on a wall and she can see it, and then suddenly everything makes sense to her, right? So it's sort of like a very exaggerated image of how this works. But then physical representation can also reduce bias, because you can put it in front of a team and you can improve your decision making and discuss things from more angles. So we call this the use of boundary objects in design. So you choose what visualizations do you communicate to other stakeholders to get more input and to see things from new sides. So we have used, for example, Legos together with the smart city experts and urban planners to try to envision how would you build a city? How did you build your previous neighborhood? What kind of laws and regulations came into it? What kind of actors pushed it forward? What kind of actors stopped it? What were your priorities? What kind of population did you want to live in there? So we build a scenario with them. And then we asked them to rebuild their wished for scenario. What is the best possible scenario? And we all asked them to put the different stakeholders in shape of a Lego figure and say, like, how did these different stakeholders impact the development of this neighborhood, which normally takes around 10 years. And we asked them to use different kinds of tools to try to reshape the process. And what is interesting when you use tangible objects such as Legos that everybody knows is that the stakeholders afterwards see their problem from the outside. So what they say is, like, they manage to see the process in a new way. Here is, for example, from neighborhood planning in Bergen, where somebody said, so this is the problem, and this is the municipality. Like, this green little figure is the municipality with this very many arms, legs, and head. And it's been quite negative to the whole plan because of where it is. But at the end, it is the contractor side, so it's a little bit over at this side. And when that happened, the fylkesman, the regional governor, he's sort of stopping it for the time being. So they make the regional governor this guy with a gun, right, trying to shoot at the municipality. So so when they built this green figure and tried to say, like, okay, this is this department and this department, they were like afterwards, okay, I didn't really realize that this arm was doing that. And it's sort of, it's playing, but it's playing with something people know, and then afterwards you get new thoughts on the process. And you can also use participatory video. We did a process with children in a school where we asked the children to go home and ask questions to their family about how would you see your neighborhood as a more sustainable one. So they went home to their parents and they interviewed them with their smartphones. And they made a video afterwards of that, trying to envision what this neighborhood would look like. And in that aspect, they both learned and they got ownership towards towards both their own neighborhood and towards what a sustainable neighborhood might be. And I had parents coming to me afterwards and saying like, what did you do to my child? Now they say they don't want to go to Spain. They want to go on a bus ride to Sweden instead because they realized it was more sustainable from their own process of making this video. So participatory video can be very transformative as a part of a scenario building process. You can also use role play. It's also a way of building scenarios. And we also use scenario building a lot as a part of service design processes. So design processes as scenario building can be a very good way to make new services user-centered because you can map out a lot of different characters and you can build stories around them. First, what you do is that you develop a persona gallery, which means you develop different characters based on where they are in the service chain. You do that based on data collection and analysis. Then you make persona descriptions of all the key stakeholders. You create different scenarios for analysis. Then you try to gain acceptance from the organization while pulling to these stories. And of course, you get more involvement from the design team. And then you illustrate different ways that people perceive the service based on where they are basically in the service process. So for example, here is a person that wants to get in touch with the health service, and you map from the time that they decide that they want to be that they need this health service until they're finished receiving the help, and you try to map their emotional journey across this whole process. And afterwards, you map out the support services, the different contact points, the different channels of communication, and you try to map and see where the pain points are and where you can improve your service. So this is also a very good way of mapping scenarios when you have very complex situations with many stakes involved in delivering something. And there are very good canvases and good methods and tools there to actually make sense of something that is very complex. But now I will move into the role of new technology, which I know you're all very interested in. And this comes very much into the service design station as well. And we see at NTNU that basically the new source of funding is everything that has to do with digitalization. So this digitalization push is very, very strong into every discipline, and everything that we work on now has to have something to do with digitalization. So this will definitely shape the future of places. So we're doing a lot of projects now on artificial intelligence and design thinking. We have a competency program now that we built up as well. And we see that immersive technology can also help envision future scenarios and create empathy, which is very strong for these visual medias. And support both backcasting techniques and forecasting techniques. And what I find pretty interesting is that the ones that have the strongest narrative in this sense are pretty large companies. So it's, for example, here is Kongsberg in Ålesund. They have one of the world's biggest simulators, which they use for training scenarios for offshore industry. So if you're going to go, for example, underwater and you're going to fix something, right? If you're going to fix a part of offshore equipment, then if you haven't trained on it enough times, then going down there and spending, for example, several days, that would be so costly that spending that money on virtual technologies instead, and making sure that your staff is trained for all these possible scenarios, that will actually save you money, even though these simulators are really, really expensive. So if you want to see immersive technologies and what you can do with it, I would go to Ålesund, because that's where they have all these training simulators. And also in Ålesund they have built the smart city. The newbie is they have a digital twin of it, so they can use this to show energy use, traffic systems. For example, they could see here that over at one end there was a traffic jam. There was a traffic jam every afternoon, and they decided to change the opening times of certain schools and daycares, and then see sort of predict where the traffic would flow if they changed opening times of different offices and schools. So they can use it to make changes in the digital model instead of in real life. So it's pretty fascinating. But of course, these models require very good data and very good equations, and often what cities fail at is to gather the good, basically the good mathematics to put the right equations into these models to make good predictions. And in Arizona State University, they also have a decision-making theater that they've set up specifically to discuss with scientists and policymakers how they can create a sustainable desert city. So this decision theater is also pretty famous. And you can also use new technologies to create the empathy, change behavior. Here you have, for example, an app that you can use in San Francisco, Look Ahead, where you can lift your phone up in the street and you can see how it will look with certain climate change scenarios. So this is AR, and will also create, or the aim is to create empathy among citizens to start changing behavior so that we don't end up in these scenarios. And the UN is also experimenting with how far virtual reality empathy will go, and they have created these virtual reality videos showing the life of Syrian refugees, for example. And they have measured that after seeing something in virtual reality compared to just on a news site, people give twice as much money, and they also are twice as likely to volunteer for an organization afterwards. This is also quite interesting and shows a little bit of this about who owns the narrative when it comes to technology. Many of the challenges ahead of us are wicked problems, and this is also where visualizations and scenario building become interesting. And this means that we have problems in which there's a range of interdependent factors or tangles that seem impossible to solve. It's these problems where it seems like you're pushing in one end and you make a problem in the other. So it's interesting to use scenarios to discuss those tangles. And then I think it's also interesting to ask, can scenario help change narratives? But also that new visualization technology is very costly, so it will maybe be certain actors that have the ability to convince people, right? You see in a city, if somebody throws out a nice image of a new street with a nice building, and then maybe you have some citizens that are protesting the same building, right? But they don't have these means to visualize their ideas or visualize the problem. So visualizations and scenarios can, with the help of technology, be very strong, and they can push the power of who owns the narrative. And we see this a lot in the smart cities. Yeah, so visualization scenario building is is hopefully a way to make complex things more simple, so that we can understand how to approach things. And in design we call this complexity. Basically, why simple things become complex and how complex things can be made simple. So when we try to put things into this scenario format, we try to make it approachable. We try to make it tangible. We try to make it evidence-based. We're trying to sequence it. So we sort of things apart and then put it together again and see if we can find new ways of handling complex problems. So now we're getting to our assignment almost, because this idea for this assignment comes from a challenge that me and another researcher called Eivind Juncker in the Smart City group. We got the challenge from the National Road Administration. And they basically asked, what are the most important pitfalls in front of us related to smart technologies, and how can we plan and regulate for it? Because what they saw was that our cities get filled up with new technologies, with new things like the sparkesykkel, what do you call them? The electric kick wheel bikes, or
scooters.
Scooters, yeah, the scooters, for example, right? Like everything that comes in through smart technologies is something that we haven't regulated for before long after they come. And basically, we have a problem in Norway and other smart cities that we don't have the competency in-house anymore in public sector. So the government and the city governments, they don't actually know how to regulate for this. So when new technologies come in, we have to make more flexible ways of adapting to it when it comes to laws and regulations. So they asked, can you help us with this? Like, how can we approach this? So what we did is that we used a worst case scenario approach. So we put together all the experts we could find in Trondheim on mobility and urban planning, both from NTNU and from the city and different companies and the National Road Administration. And we made a worst case scenario approach in which the different groups were given certain stories, certain examples of situations in smart cities in the world. And then we worked in groups to dig ourselves as far down as possible into the problem, because you make the problem as big as possible before you try to tackle it. So what they came up with was, for example, that you get the situation in which Apple City wants to solve everything for the city, and they want to push in their self-driving cars, and they want to have a private technology company basically rule all the digital services of the city. And then the groups dig themselves down until they reach like the worst case scenario, in which you have a post-apocalypse. You have no car or driving services. You have no trust between people. You have worse public health. You have a worse mental health. You have an unregulated city spread because private actors want to basically own the right for the different lanes in the highways and these things. So you make a scenario that is as bad as you can imagine, and then you use those different steps to regulate yourself out of that situation. And then these companies and organizations, they came up with different partnerships that they could create in order to regulate towards these lack of control situations that are possible in smart cities. So the benefits of the worst case scenario is that for many, making the problem worse can be easier, especially with a complex problem, and especially with people that work with a situation on a daily basis, because they know so much about the challenges and every time they come up with a good idea, they come up with a reason why it won't happen. So making a worst case scenario, it forces people to think negatively, but that actually pushes them subconsciously to think creatively and positive. And it also allows you to identify multiple pain points, but most importantly, makes it possible to identify core values for future planning. So, our aim today is that we will try this with you. So now we'll turn this off.
I can say just a little about this case that we thought of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So also because we wanted to speak to the field of future of digital technologies, and the project we're having on it focuses a lot also on biometric technologies and biometric data. So we thought of a future scenario from where we are in the year 2030, and we're in a country that has experienced a massive influx of refugees from a neighboring country with an outbreak of major war, and with a brutal authoritarian regime. You may think like Syria as a parallel, but in a future scenario. And in this country where we're in, the authorities, they don't really have privacy and data protection legislation in place, and also they don't necessarily consider the refugees as legal subjects. That they see them primarily as a big problem to be tackled. And then you have also international humanitarian organizations that enter and offer their services in terms of setting up camps and so on for the refugees and handling this. And some of these organizations have proper data protection regulations that they adhere to. But then there are other organizations that enter with kind of a high-tech profile. And amongst these, there's a company, and what did we call it, Brita? It's there, Happy to See You. That's our company, and they offer the authorities a range of biometric technologies and technologies for handling that biometric data that can be used to tackle this refugee flow and the chaos that is currently in that country. So the first step of our scenario would be to try to come up with the sorts of biometric technologies that we can envision this company to offer the authorities. So at present, the predominant biometric technologies are fingerprinting, iris scans, and facial recognition. So we can put that on the list. But then I'd like to open the floor for imagined or real, scenarios for what this company might offer. So I'm looking a bit at Kristin, Ben, Katja, and Larissa, and Maria, who are in this project, but also, of course, others would be very welcome to join this discussion. And it would also be, although we're looking at Brita's screen, so we can't necessarily see each other very well, it would be welcome to also put on your cameras. So,
so can just say that that here there are some rules. Like, you can come up with as many bad ideas that you can. List all the properties of those terrible ideas. List what makes the worst of these so very bad. So whatever you say, I will write it down on a post-it. So we'll put it into this. You can see it on the screen.
But Brita, not all of these technologies are inherently bad, right? But it's
no, but we write
that...
down everything, and here you have the chance to pull out your creative pessimist.
Okay, so the challenge is yours. Anyone, please raise your hand and come up with a potential technology that we can put on this list.
Okay, so basically we have a challenge, right? We have the challenge that happy to see you. They come in and they want to sell this system on biometric and facial recognition systems to register and manage new refugees in a new camp. So what is the worst that can happen? Use your imagination. What is the worst next thing that could happen?
Yes, Sian, please.
Yeah, I think I can answer that question. If the question is what is the outcome?
What is the worst outcome, Miss?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking of an analogy like how some of the big GM companies, they end up owning patents to plants and crops. Could something potentially analogous happen with human information data, where you end up having, some degree of ownership over people's personal information or even their DNA? I really don't know very much about this kind of new technology.
Yeah,
but something like that.
But I think that's very relevant, because that's what happened in the Google city in Toronto, right? They've run into problems with that, because if you're going to run a system like that, you need to earn money on it, and often what you earn money on is this possibility to sell the information to third parties in some form.
Excellent. And I have Ben, please. Ben, can't hear you.
Sorry, you'd have thought I'd have figured out the unmute by now. So it's a live facial recognition system. I guess maybe it's like equipped with some sort of emotion detection, and that is deployed to like not only figure out who people are, but like, the extent to which they pose some kind of real or imagined threat, and linked to some other horrific means of controlling or worse to those people. Is that the sort of thing you're thinking about?
That's interesting. So you're thinking maybe you could see and you can say like, hey, you're about to hurt someone, or...
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of experimentation going on in this regard. You can also, you can tell if, they're using emotion detection systems to try to figure out if people are telling the truth or have malicious intent, or try to figure out other attributes about those people. Also by scanning people's faces, which seems to be complete bunkum. Over.
So, Kristin, are you back? I was thinking, yeah, we have Katja, and then I wanted Kristin to say something about wearables. But Katja, please.
Yeah, I want just to make a brief intervention. I think it's not so far into the future, the risk of not just the data being collected, but the data being shared. So this is of course a different question from what you're asking about the sort of future forms of biometrics, but I think it's a relevant scenario nonetheless, regardless almost of the type of biometric. What does the sharing of that information entail subsequently to being sort of in a database owned by either a humanitarian organization or the happy to see you company? So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So what would you say is the worst thing that could happen in terms of a company sharing information?
I'm really I think what concerns me is the scenario that we have already seen with the World Food Programme having partnerships with Palantir, who also at the same time is known to work with counter-terror actors. So for me, it's the sort of sharing data with actors whose interests may not necessarily align with those of humanitarian actors. So they're not necessarily the protection of refugees, but more the focus on national security and counter-terror efforts, and the rest of it linked with the scenario that Ben was sort of outlining, with some sort of faith in technologies that may not actually have proven to be as effective as they are imagined to be, with sort of detecting emotions. But you know, what if they're wrong? But consequences are nonetheless potentially fatal.
So it's sort of it breaks with any sort of legal system, right?
Yeah, and ethical, and you know, and the sort of I think it's a question of the sort of going back to your presentation before, what is the vision at the end of all of this? And for me, the humanitarian vision looks different from the counter-terror vision. If you go back and say, what's the aim of all of this? But if data sharing means that somehow these two visions blur to an extent, I think that's for me a worst possible scenario.
Okay, excellent. I have Larissa and Jade and Turid. I talked about wearables, and I could just quickly say that from what I've heard from Kristin earlier, a likely technology that is being developed is wearables that monitor the health, and it could then in a chaotic situation, this company could offer to monitor the health and the sort of health needs of the refugees in simple ways, and then just feed it into a database where one could combine that with biometric IDs, and then channel the assistance, including medical assistance, to the right people in the most efficient way. Right, so this is a potential, another potential one. Then there is also potential uses of DNA, but I'm not sure exactly what that would imply. Okay, so Larissa.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think part of what you were just identifying, Christopher, is around surveillance, like the possibilities of surveillance by combining different data sets, and it could be sort of surveillance that you sort of knowingly consent to by saying, yes, you can monitor my health information, but there's all sorts of potential surveillance that is implied with the sharing of data with third-party monitors that you may or may not have consented to. And so how do you opt out of that? How do you are you able to opt out of that if you're a refugee and the only way you can access health services, for example, is by consenting to the collection of your data? Then is that really true consent, or is that coercive? So I think those are a couple of issues. Another sort of unrelated issue, I think, is about, it's more on the sort of technical side and less on the ethical side, and that is around, data sharing. In many cases can be a really good thing, but there's all sorts of technical and even regulatory constraints that make that really difficult. It could be the way that data are collected are not interoperable, between different kinds of data collection. mechanisms, and so you can't actually maximize the data, or you spend so much time trying to make those data interoperable, whether in a technical sense or even a conceptual sense, because they're defined differently. So there's all sorts of other issues around data sharing that may sort of limit the possibilities of any sort of technology that you might identify. I'll stop there.
And I forgot to ask you to introduce yourselves just with the name and affiliation. So Jade, you'll be the first.
Happy to do that. So Jade, obviously, Save the Children chief analyst. In maybe three ideas. The first one really is something that has already been discussed, but just to put it bluntly, the economic interests precede of our humanitarian agenda, or protection concerns. The second is, and I'm going to take a dark turn here, but having in mind identity fraud as something very much happening already, I would imagine the setup of a black market for human organ trafficking. If you need a fingerprint, here's a finger type of thing. And the third one really would be around resource diversion. The money allocated to this private company, or to sort of like the costs of putting that in place, would be, instead of actually going for the benefit of the communities and support them, would go to sort of fraudulent economic actors taking advantage of that opening of the market, and potentially some sort of expert niche that they would be capable of demonstrating. So I'll stop here. Yep, thank you.
No, don't stop. That's great. If you have, you can take it further. I mean, you should be able to make it as specific as possible and as detailed as possible. It is a chance to make it dark.
For sure. I've just wanted to let others speak as well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay,
Brita.
perfect. So Turid, please.
Hi, I'm Turid Lagreit, so I'm with Red Barna, but also a background with OCHA and others, and working on protection. So asking someone like me to really go for the darkest and worst case scenario, it's difficult to hold back. I want to follow up on Jade's and also some of the other concerns, because I think that what you also need to do is to really do a kind of a risk analysis for the population that is not only technology focused. So really, what are the worst risks? Because they have experienced something already. I assume that these are refugees because of conflict, right? So then it's really who is actually interested in harming them, and actually asking some of those and do that stakeholder mapping, because it could be, as Jade said, well, it could be someone out there to that there is an existing network for if this would be Latin America, for example, it could very well be. It could also be a child abuse and trafficking. So I think that really looking at what is there already in the local setting or in the context, but also on net. And I think that as a child rights organization, it's also really to look at what are the basic rights, what are the that we need to protect, and who can have an interest in either hacking or buying data that could facilitate their evil intents. So I think that could be one way of looking at it, and then you could really add on. It could be ethnic, kind of. It could be intelligence, interested in knowing the ethnic composition, the origins of people, so that they could go in and target and kill.
Yeah.
That is, if you want it dark, and this is not. Yeah. I'm not making up things. I agree. So I think that that type of identity, that I think that the two main things are identities that can have people targeted because of the conflict, and then the potential for abuse, particularly for women and children, but also for forced recruitment, etc. And I think that all of those technologies that you mentioned could facilitate that type of access and targeting and abuse of the children.
Yeah, thank you. So
And
somebody has to describe the bottom of this process, right? So thank you.
yeah, and you really covered lots there, Turid. And in addition, we could think of, okay, what would the potential things, how would that look in 2030? New types of potential abuse that we don't see now. And I think there's generally, when we discuss ethics of of the new technologies and what can go wrong, we often tend to isolate the technology from changes in the context. So great that you bring in the context to it. Kristin.
Thanks. I just 3 brief points. I mean, the first one is sort of, how dark does it get, right? The darknet is full of refugees' data being sold, their organs being sold. I mean, like, there are security services in the world with a fairly good grasp of how dark this gets, and sort of how the digital is interwoven with the physical, and it's difficult to incorporate into human risk scenarios. And I really appreciate this intervention on, we can think that it's really bad that people have their data protection rights violated, but what is the alternative, or where did they come from? Because this is, after all, we're talking about emergencies. And then, you mentioned Palantir, so I was just speaking to a colleague the other day who's doing some internal something with WPF staff, WFP staff, who's been very unhappy about Palantir, but at the same time, it seems like Palantir has been really functional in improving the organization. So if what you're up against is the Islamic State and the darknet, how bad is Palantir? And then that brings me to my sort of real point. And I'm not sure as much as the technology, but look at the 2 years ago. Would you have imagined that you could be a criminal for being 1.3 meters away from someone, for not wearing a mask? There are just so many things that we have criminalized and penalized over the last year that would have been unthinkable, 2 years ago. I just put the little thing I wrote on the Ebola drone, back in 2014. I thought it was absolutely insane that somebody would suggest that you would have a drone trying to monitor people in infectious diseases and even taking their temperature. Today it doesn't look so insane. So it's all about how you classify practices as insecure and then choose to target certain individuals. And so I think the social and the political is as important as the technology, right? Because that's what makes you show up in the first place. But I mean, together with Nathaniel Raymond, we've had this discussion over the last year almost about ethics. And Ben is Ben still here? I don't know. Like the fact that we sit all day in a room, and this is the discussion I've had with Larissa and Katja as well. We sit all day in a room and then we reinvent data protection, or we invest all our resources in ethics. And at the end of the day, where does this really go in doing anything? And should we really have Palantir as as Darth Vader? I'm just no longer clear on this, right? So it's about trying to figure out priorities, I think.
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe I can't see if there are any more hands there, Christopher.
No, and I see there's a ladder that goes the other way.
Yeah, because I was thinking just to go not to sleep better tonight. Like we can make a few steps. What would you do to get up again from this worst case scenario? What are the things that need to be in place here to get up again to protection of people?
As Ben has to leave shortly, maybe Ben, you could quickly introduce yourself and then share your solutions.
That's really hard. So I'm Ben Hayes. I'm from a data rights agency called AWO. My background is working for a bunch of organizations that are implicated in the humanitarian innovation discussion, and I should clarify that my views are personal ones and do not represent AWO, those of AWO or any of its clients. It's hard to follow what Kristen just said, really, because I think some of the solutions are found in some of the mechanisms that we do have, and some of the things that, for instance, the European Union, potentially the Biden administration are putting forward. So, robust data protection. I would say this because I run a data protection consultancy, but robust data protection, rigidly and properly implemented, difficult as it is to do in humanitarian settings, is one part of the solution. But that, needs to be accompanied by meaningful red lines that say, well, if we can't mitigate these data protection risks, we're not going to do X, Y, Z. That's really difficult to achieve in practice when you have a humanitarian imperative. I think, second and third things, I think we're going to start seeing comprehensive regulations for the use of biometrics, facial recognition, things like that. It's already in the draft regulation on artificial intelligence at the EU level. National Security Commission on AI in the US has also proposed, a binding framework for the use of biometrics in that country. I think, the regulation of AI and the prohibition of certain forms of AI, as again, the EU has proposed in its regulation, also part of the solution. Yeah, I'm going to stop there and let others who have better imagination and less pragmatism have a go.
Others? I know you did something very interesting, Ben, on the issue of biometric identification and identity cards. How to balance the idea of centralized databases on biometrics and the problem that info could be lost. And yeah, so you might come back to that as an example of pragmatism, but actually I have several hands. So I have Katja. Please, now you can introduce yourself, and then Maria and Christian. Thanks.
Hey again, I'm Katja Jacobsen. I'm a senior researcher at the Center for Military Studies at Copenhagen University. I work with Larissa and Kristen and others on humanitarian innovation, and I look in particular at biometrics. So I do agree with Ben that a lot of this can of course be addressed through regulation. I'm a little bit I favor the idea of a red line as well, but I think also adding to that is the sort of need to ask much more upfront why we're doing this in the first place. I think for me, this is where, sometimes it just becomes a standard practice to always necessarily collect biometrics from all refugees. The age limit is sort of going down, so now it's children and infants, etc., etc. And I think sort of like there is a need to also just ask these questions about why we're doing it, if it's worth it. It's a lot of money, as someone was mentioning before as well. Are we spending them in the right way? So it's not only about regulating data, it's also a question that comes before why are we collecting them in the first place, and is it always necessary?
Right. I guess that's a big part of the answer also, in terms of thinking of how we get towards 2030 and how 2030 looks in general, also in terms of the technological context. Maria.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Maria Gabrielsen-Jumbert, PRIO and NCHS. I was just thinking, sort of based on all this worst case scenario, and it has been alluded to already, sort of what, not just what are the worst case scenario technologies, but what are the effects of this? And one thing to think of, building on what Ben and Katja already said, in terms of regulations, is not just the regulation, but what are the access of a legal, what is it called, a recourse for, or to complain for those individuals who are registered wrongly, for instance, that they're, along with their identity record, maybe they claim to be who they are, but in the record they show up to be someone else, or they have been victims of identity fraud, or other errors in the system show that they, for instance, are not entitled to protection, but they claim they are, or that these errors also make them cut off from rights to access food and healthcare, for instance. So what are the legal avenues for them to complain, either individually or through organizations, when there are also vulnerable people who might not want to raise a case in a given state, for instance. So what? Yeah, I don't know if it can be summed up in terms of the access to complain and have to have your case reassessed. Thank you.
Okay, Kristin. And do you want to introduce yourself?
I can also introduce myself. I think I've met most of you. I'm the project leader of this project, and I'm sort of have a dual appointment as a research professor in humanitarian studies and in legal sociology. I'm just wondering if you're old. I mean, I also work on the 22nd of July in Oslo and the legal aftermath, and part of the issue is whether it's been so hard on survivors afterwards, because the internet has been so unregulated and has just become this dump. And I'm just wondering if something similar is going on in the humanitarian field, that it's partly that this has happened in a period of time where we've gone from thinking that cyberspace cannot really be meaningfully constrained to realizing that yes, it can and should be constrained. But I think this has maybe also shaped how we as humanitarian scholars and practitioners have thought about possibilities and dangers. So if we, and very often, this has run up against freedom of speech, for example. But I'm just wondering if we're kind of stuck in a sort of old 1999 mindset about this place sometimes. And that maybe this is generational for those of you born after 1990, I apologize. But there's something here about how this space is now looking so different than it did 10 years ago. And we never actually talk about that much when we talk about digital technologies.
Yeah, so you're thinking that we put the frame too narrow?
I'm thinking that we sort of wash our hands of the possibilities to do something with this. We sort of throw them up in the air and like, oh my God, it's overwhelming. And it's a sort of, it's almost like technological utopianism the other way, right? Or determinism. This is just the way it is.
Yeah.
So I guess that's also it speaks to the fact that this is sort of a worst case scenario. I think if we had more time, we could have come up with much more detail, as also Brita requested, on how bad this scenario actually is, and I guess also the case included some background assumptions, like that a country where this happens does not really have data protection legislation or other legislation that could stop these technologies, and the neighboring country might have a very, an authoritarian regime with a very high-tech intelligence apparatus that would be able to infiltrate these systems and potentially also manipulating the data and really exploit this whole setup. So in terms of then means to avoid that, much of the solution would be to try to avoid these contextual factors, to avoid that you would have such a country in 2030 without a regulation of these issues, and also that you would have a super advanced authoritarian high-tech regime somewhere that would exploit these technologies. So the solution to those issues doesn't then lie in the immediate regulation of the technology, but rather in the context. I think that also speaks a bit to your points, Kristin.
Exactly.
Then,
So I
yeah.
think like if we run this workshop in a way that I would have wanted, right? We would have spent maybe a couple of days and we'd pick out certain scenarios and we'd work with those as frame, and then we would work also on a more structural level, like how would you involve the national institutions, or how would you involve local stakeholders? What kind of work would you do to make this ladder up again, right? So you would, what struck me when I was studying humanitarian markets was also what the playground this humanitarian bubble is for all sorts of bad technological ideas and bad, like just companies that don't need to have any, they don't need to have the same safe networks around them as we expect from companies in our own country. So that is something on a structural level that has to change, right? So I would want to have a scenario approach on that more higher level discussion as well.
If I can just intervene, I'm sort of,
Yes,
I would like at some point to have an extended discussion about legal frameworks and strategies. So, I mean, for individuals and groups, there's always the Aliens Tort Claims Act, where you can sort of go to the US and get redress for human rights abuses abroad. And conversely, there is the False Claims Act, which was, for example, I guess someone here, the Norwegian people said, had a very hard run-in with the Americans. And very often this is a American law used by activists to basically defund aid to the Palestine. But it has potential to be used in a lot more places. And so that's a threat. But I'm just wondering if the big battle is really around GDPR, and if sort of not having legislation. I'm just wondering if we should try. And you would need a hardcore lawyer to do this, but I think we also need to try to move beyond this. And I think partly the reason why is that this is such an under-legalized field, with so little interested in sort of strategic lawyering and so few lawyers employed in the organizations to deal with due diligence and more, and particularly the digital components. I mean, I know this is something that personally I'm super interested in, but there's something here where the digital is seen almost without law, which I find extremely odd.
Right. Brita, do you want to kind of wrap up this one, and then we could have a sort of meta discussion in the final minutes on this whole field?
Yes, it's really hard because now I felt like we were really getting into an interesting discussion. But yes.
Okay, yeah.
No, but
So if you have something on your mind, then please share it before we wrap up.
Yeah, there's one more hand up.
Okay, yeah, we do have Jade. Please.
Sorry, that would be mine. Something slightly on a side note, but that I feel I need to say as well. There's one aspect of the worst case scenario, which is also, you know, what bad you create or generate or exacerbate by doing scenarios and by talking about the worst cases with teams in particular. And we had the case recently. You asked me at the very beginning of the session to sort of share experiences. We had the case very recently that, you know, the sort of like emotional cost and the exposure of talking about all those worst cases can be really heavy. And I just thought, you know, for this group to also reflect on the responsibility that we have to talk about the future in a way that is not putting our staff or partners, you know, the communities that we consult in a worse place than they already are. I think it's just now that we're using more and more of those foresight tools and forecasting tools, I think it has to be done in a very sensitive way. And I hope it's just a common message coming across. Just wanted to flag that before leaving the call.
Excellent point. Brita, do you have a comment before we have Kristin?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for that input. Yes.
Okay, Kristin. You mute.
Yeah, but I would like to just tell you, yeah.
There you are,
Sorry.
Kristin.
Hi.
Yeah, no, here I'm with sound. No, I was just thanking Jade for the intervention. I think my sense is that the nature of this field, you know, increasingly I sit through forums in global health where the chairs talk about people getting pregnant, and that makes me very angry. You can't talk about people getting pregnant if one is a guy aged 30 and the other one is a girl aged 11. We have to sort of call things by their names. So I think it's doing this responsibly and sort of ethically. I think it's a really good call. I'm teaching robot regulations and legal tech, I think I mentioned, and we never talk about, when we talk about the bad of technology, we only talk about the US. So that we only talk about American treatment of African Americans. And that has a very specific political reasons, because we do not want to put students in our class in danger. And probably we wouldn't like to get cyber insecure ourselves either. But I think it's very, having these digital forums, all the things we don't talk about due to the fact that clearly you can spy in on this anytime you want. It's sensitive, you don't really know everyone around the table. I think that's as problematic. I mean, the censorship, you know, that we go through class after class and we never say China. Thank you.
Brita?
Yeah, so of course this is just one technique, and in a better process, you would prepare it and target it towards the specific participants and more specific questions. But I wanted to tell you, because I'm setting up lifelong learning courses for private and public sector. And I wanted to show that we have just received funding for a course called Strategic Design and Scenario Building. We are creating from this fall, together with the National Road Administration, Uninet, Trøndelag Kommune, Trønder Energi, Digital Norway, and Prio, with Prio's partners. So we will go into strategic design for business development, value creation in new contexts, scenario building, putting organizations in a position to take knowledge-based and context-specific images of the future and how to use it in their strategies. So this will be 7.5 study point courses, and there will be pilot courses. So they're run by myself and somebody called Tonje Wanger, who is an expert in strategic design. And it will be possible to bring in cases from your own organizations that we will work with you to develop those cases during the classes. So in the first pilots, it will be free to participate. So we just wanted to present this to you as an opportunity.
Excellent, and thanks so much, Brita, for your contribution to this meeting. I want to say on a more general note relating to the wider field of ethics of humanitarian innovation and digital technologies, how I've been frustrated with kind of the discussions being based a lot on scenarios of the future, where the different positions in the discussions often rely on rather unnuanced assumptions about how things will eventually develop. And there's this notion of mission creep, but mission creep should just be the first name of a wide set of kind of ideas of how things can potentially develop and what impact that has on our assessment, ethically, legally, politically, of new technologies and new ideas. So in that respect, I think this field of foresight and scenario development, it offers a sort of language that should be more widely known when these discussions on new technologies are so much relying on assumptions about the future. So that's therefore also I think this has been a very interesting and important topic to bring up. I'm really happy for that all of you participated, and we didn't get time, Ben, for the case of your work with the ICRC on guidance on biometrics, but that ICRC guidance is something I'd like to refer people to. It's an example of how to deal with this in terms of regulation. And with that, I thank you all for participating, and this meeting was recorded, as you know, and you will be then very welcome to share a slightly edited version of this. So you'll now get the immediate raw version in your chat, but please keep that for yourself as a good memory, and then we will distribute a slightly edited version to you later. Okay, thanks a lot and bye.